You're listening to The Damp Within. Tonight's story is Jacob Evans, Aledo, Texas, 2012. There's something deeply unsettling when evil comes from a place where love should have lived. That was the case in Aledo, Texas, in the fall of 2012. A small, seemingly peaceful town where life moved slow, where neighbors waved at each other from porches, and where the horror that was about to unfold felt impossible. Jake Evans was only 17 years old. To many in the town, he was just another quiet kid. He came from a well-off family, lived in a large home in a gated community, and on the surface had everything a teenager could need. He wasn't known for getting into trouble. He wasn't someone who had a history of violence or even loud rebellion. He was polite, respectful, maybe a bit shy, but beneath that, still water, something far darker was brewing. Something terrifying, something utterly tragic. It's hard to say exactly when Jacob changed, or if he was ever truly okay to begin with. He was intelligent, introspective, and deeply affected by the world around him. He also had a fascination with death, not the kind that most teenagers flirt with during a phase of watching horror films or listening to heavy music. Jacob's thoughts about death ran deeper, more obsessive, more personal. In the weeks before the tragedy, Jacob became increasingly withdrawn. He had stopped going to school and was being homeschooled. He spent hours alone in his room, often watching violent films. He later admitted that one movie in particular, the remake of Halloween, had impacted him. He watched how Michael Myers killed his family, and disturbingly, he identified with him. That was the moment he said he felt a weird sort of pride. That sentence, when you hear it, feels like ice down your spine. He began to fantasize about killing not strangers, not classmates, but his own family, his mother, Jamie Evans, and his 15-year-old sister, Mallory. And what makes this story even more horrifying is not just what he did, but how calmly and coldly he carried it out. It was the night of October 3rd, 2012. Jake had written a 4-page letter earlier that day. Not exactly a suicide note, not quite a manifesto, but a disturbingly calculated explanation of what he was about to do. In it, he expressed admiration for serial killers. He spoke about how he no longer believed in God. He wrote that he had felt this growing urge to kill for months, and that he believed killing his family would free him, not just himself, but them too. He believed the world was cruel, and that death would be mercy. What kind of darkness must twist a young boy's mind to think that murdering his mother and sister was some twisted form of liberation? That night, Jacob stole his grandfather's revolver. He paced back and forth in the hallway outside his sister Mallory's room. He would later say that she was watching the Disney Channel. She was innocent, completely unaware of the storm swirling outside her door. He knocked. She answered, and with a tremble in his voice, he told her their mother needed her. When Mallory stepped into the hallway, Jacob raised the gun and shot her in the head and chest. But she didn't die immediately. She fell to the ground crying out for help, crying for her brother not to kill her. And that part breaks something inside you, because even after being shot, Mallory called out for Jake, the brother she trusted. And what did Jacob do? He went to find another bullet. He reloaded, returned to where she lay, and shot her again, this time killing her. Then he went downstairs. His mother, Jamie, had heard the commotion. Maybe she knew instantly what was happening, or maybe she didn't want to believe it. But when she saw Jacob, armed, face pale, but eyes emotionless, she knew. He pointed the gun at her and fired 3 times. The mother who raised him, the sister who played games with him, laughed with him, loved him, gone by his hand. After the killing, Jacob did something strange. He called 911 himself. His voice in the call was eerily calm. You can still hear it online. The dispatcher asks what happened, and Jacob, almost emotionless, responds, "Yes, ma'am. I just killed my mom and my sister," like he was reading a grocery list. He gives them the address, says he's unarmed, and waits for the police to arrive. He was arrested without resistance. Later, when questioned, Jacob would say he felt weird after the killings, not panicked, not entirely remorseful, just strange. He said he felt like he had to kill his sister first because he didn't want her to be alone in death after their mother. That line, "So she wouldn't die alone," it sticks with you. Twisted logic soaked in madness. But somewhere in that twisted thought process, there was something broken, not just morally, but mentally. The aftermath shattered the community of Aledo. No one could comprehend how a quiet teenager with no history of violence could do something so unspeakable. Mental health professionals would later testify that Jacob had shown signs of psychosis and paranoia, that he had suffered from undiagnosed mental illness. But even those explanations felt hollow to those mourning Jamie and Mallory. A brilliant, kind woman, a funny, sweet teenage girl, wiped out in moments of madness. Jacob was eventually charged with capital murder. At first, he faced the possibility of life without parole, but due to his age being under 18, the law prevented that. He eventually accepted a plea deal in 2015 and was sentenced to 4 to 5 years in prison. with the possibility of parole after 22 years. By the time he's eligible, he'll be in his late 30s. But what kind of life will that be? What kind of peace can there ever be after doing something like this? To this day, no one truly understands why Jacob Evans did what he did. Maybe not even Jacob himself. But one thing is certain, his actions left a permanent scar on everyone who knew the Evans family. And for those of us hearing the story, it's a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't strangers to the dark. They're people we thought we knew. You're listening to The Damp Within. Tonight's story is Joseph Clark, 43 Hours of Hell. The world has a way of hiding its darkness beneath a veil of normalcy, making it hard to predict when tragedy will strike or how close it might be for Lisa O'Neill. That darkness came in the form of Joseph Clark, a man who was living a life just like any other. But beneath his seemingly normal facade, there was something broken, something twisted, lurking just under the surface. And on November 26, 1994, during an otherwise ordinary encounter, the boiling rage and twisted emotions that had been festering inside Joseph would explode, unleashing a nightmare that would last for 43 hours. That evening started like many others, a seemingly ordinary night. Joseph Clark, a man in his late 30s, had invited Lisa to his home, a place where for the first time their lives would collide in an unimaginable way. Joseph was not a man with a history of violence, but deep inside him was a growing darkness, an emotional instability that had been building for years. His mind, once calm and composed, had been overtaken by unresolved pain, bitterness, and frustration that he could never quite put into words. Lisa O'Neill, on the other hand, was a woman who was just trying to live her life. But life has a way of bringing people together, and for reasons that seemed insignificant at the time, she found herself in Joseph's company. Little did she know her decision to step into his house that night would lead to something unspeakable. There was no warning, no sign that this was more than a social visit. And yet, as soon as they entered the house, the mood shifted. Something was off. Joseph seemed different. His eyes, cold and distant, were filled with an energy that was almost predatory. At first, it wasn't clear what exactly triggered it. The tensions between them, his emotions, or something else entirely. But it didn't take long for Joseph to snap. When Lisa rejected his advances, something in him broke. That rejection was the spark that ignited the rage inside him. To him, this was no longer just a failed social interaction. It was an affront to his pride, to his self-worth. His mental state was fragile, his anger easily triggered, and when it snapped, it did so violently. The horror that followed seemed almost unreal. Joseph Clark, a man who had been like any other on the outside, became a monster in an instant. His anger clouded everything. Lisa was at his mercy, and he made sure to remind her of it every chance he got. She was now trapped in a situation from which there was no escape. She was terrified. The nightmare began almost immediately. Joseph locked the doors, and Lisa was confined to that house, a victim of his uncontrollable rage. There were no words of reason, no plea for mercy. Joseph wasn't speaking. He wasn't just angry. He was consumed by his own feelings of hurt and rejection, and those emotions translated into something much worse. For 43 long hours, Lisa was held captive. Can you even begin to imagine what it feels like to be held against your will, to be forced into a situation where every hour drags on forever? Lisa was forced to endure endless psychological torment. Joseph's rage wasn't just physical, it was deep, personal, and twisted. She was subjected to horrifying violence, physical abuse, and emotional degradation. Every second of those 43 hours was filled with terror and desperation. It must have felt like time itself had stopped, as if the world outside had ceased to exist. There was no escape. The walls closed in on Lisa. She couldn't reason with him, couldn't plead for mercy. Not that it would have mattered. In his deranged state, Joseph had already made up his mind. His actions became more erratic as the hours wore on, and with each passing moment, the pain, the suffering, and the fear mounted. The physical torment she endured was only a small part of the pain. The psychological abuse, the isolation, the degradation was perhaps even worse. Imagine the weight of that, the constant dread that the next moment might be your last. There was no comfort, no solace. It's almost impossible to understand what someone like Lisa must have felt during those hours. Could she even think, or was she too consumed by the fear of what would happen next? How many times did she wonder if she would ever leave that house alive? And what went through her mind when she realized that her tormentor was once an ordinary person, someone she never thought could turn into a monster? But Lisa, despite everything, refused to give up. There was something inside her, a spark of survival, a refusal to be broken. She fought against the physical pain, against the mental torture, and against the crushing hopelessness that surrounded her. Somehow, against all odds, she survived. She kept fighting, kept holding on, even when it felt like everything was falling apart around her. She didn't let Joseph's cruelty break her spirit completely. The ordeal finally ended when the authorities found Lisa. After 43 hours, they were able to intervene and rescue her from the clutches of her captor. She was barely recognizable, physically and emotionally destroyed by the torment she had suffered. But she was alive, and that in itself was a miracle. The police arrived just in time to stop the nightmare from continuing to pull Lisa out of that house of horrors and return her to the world that she had been cruelly ripped away from. Joseph Clark didn't escape the consequences of his actions. He was arrested and charged with kidnapping, torture, and other unspeakable crimes. His trial revealed more about his disturbed mental state, but in the end, it did little to change what he had done. The scars he left on Lisa were deep and permanent, and no punishment could ever undo the pain and suffering he had inflicted on her. What's worse, though, is the way Joseph Clark's actions reflect the depths of human cruelty. The idea that someone could hold another person captive, subject them to such horrific abuse, all for nothing more than personal rage. It's almost beyond comprehension. It's a stark reminder of how fragile the human mind can be, and how unchecked anger and mental illness can manifest into unspeakable violence. And even after it was over, Lisa's life was never the same. The trauma, the scars, physical and emotional, would follow her forever. The memories of those 43 hours of hell would never fade, no matter how much she tried to move forward. The weight of it all would always linger. But Lisa's story, as horrific as it is also one of survival, of resilience. It shows us the strength of the human spirit, even in the face of unimaginable terror. Even when all seems lost, there is still a chance to fight back, to survive, to make it through. For Lisa, the road ahead was long, filled with therapy, healing, and the challenge of rebuilding her life. But the most important part of her story is that she survived a survivor in every sense of the word. Of Halloween night, 1984, Decatur, Illinois. It was supposed to be a night of laughter, of kids running door to door with bags full of candy, their costumes gleaming under the street lights. A night of innocent fun. But for one young girl, this Halloween would be her last. Tammy Zavicki, an 8-year-old girl with bright eyes and an excited smile, had dressed up as a little black cat. She was laughing, running with her friends, enjoying the simple thrill of trick-or-treating. Her parents were just a few houses away, keeping a careful eye on her. As the group of kids made their way down the familiar streets, the night was buzzing with excitement. But as the evening wore on, something went terribly wrong. Tammy was last seen walking with her friends, happily heading towards another house. But when they turned around, she was no longer with them. She had vanished. At first, no one thought much of it. Maybe she had gotten separated from the group. After all, it was Halloween night, and in the chaos of running from one house to the next, it wasn't unheard of for kids to lose track of one another. But when the night ended and Tammy still hadn't returned home, the panic set in. Her mother, knowing something was terribly wrong, frantically called the police. You could hear the fear in her voice, the gut-wrenching terror that any parent who has ever lost sight of their child knows all too well. It was Halloween, and yet she wasn't coming home. For days the town searched desperate for answers. Volunteers, the police, and even strangers from neighboring towns combed through woods, fields, and abandoned buildings, but no sign of Tammy. The hours stretched into days, and the town of Decatur, usually so peaceful, was gripped by dread. Then 2 days later, her body was found, hidden in a secluded area in the outskirts of town. Her small body had been dumped in a shed. It was discovered that she had been brutally attacked, raped, beaten. Her life was stolen from her in the most horrific way imaginable. The news sent shock waves through the community. How could something so evil happen right under their noses? A child, their child, taken in an instant, never to be seen alive again. The person responsible was David Lee M., a man with a troubling past and a history of violent offenses. He had already been flagged by the system, known to have committed previous assaults, but somehow he was still free, still walking among them. He was arrested quickly. The evidence was clear, and he confessed to the crime in detail. His words were chilling. He described how he lured Tammy away from the others, took her to the abandoned shed, and took her life. But what made the whole thing even more disturbing was his complete lack of remorse. He wasn't crying. He wasn't begging for forgiveness. He wasn't sorry. He simply stated, "I just wanted to see what it felt like to take someone's life." That statement still haunts me. The utter coldness, the total detachment. A child, an innocent 8-year-old girl, reduced to nothing more than a plaything for his twisted desires. David was sentenced to death, but before he could face the ultimate punishment for his actions, he chose to take his own life in prison. He hung himself in his cell, a cowardly escape from the consequences of his actions. But what did he really escape? The truth is, David would never escape the memory of what he did. The world would always remember Tammy Zawicki, a little girl whose life was stolen on Halloween, a night meant for fun and laughter. And what about her family? How do you heal from such an unimaginable loss? How do you pick up the pieces when your world has been shattered by a predator who showed no mercy. Tammy's mother said she never celebrated Halloween again. Every time she heard children laughing or saw costumes, her heart would break all over again. She would always remember the terror in her daughter's eyes, the final scream of a little girl who didn't deserve to die that way. Tammy's death sparked outrage not only in Decatur, but across the entire nation. People demanded better protection for children, tougher laws for sexual predators, and greater awareness of the signs of danger lurking in their communities. But no matter how many laws were passed or how many rallies were held, it wouldn't bring Tammy back. This tragedy left a mark on the town, on its people. It served as a constant reminder that evil can slip unnoticed into the most innocent places. In a world filled with candy costumes and tricks, sometimes the most terrifying thing is the face that stands next to you. It's next